J. Willgoose Esq from Public Service Broadcasting, and you are listening to the Capsule podcast on liveinlimbo.com.
The world of color. Color, the touchstone of reality. Color to excite the mind. The vivid, pulsating miracle that gives substance to shadow. One of the outstanding scientific and artistic triumphs of the 20th century. Now there is color everywhere. Color within the reach of everyone. It happened with a suddenness that rocked the civilized world. The entire world will stream into our living rooms with the velocity of light. Spectacular.
This is Capsule on liveinlimbo.com. My name is Sean Chin.
And I am Andreas Babiolakis. This is an audio experience where we take you on an adventure to music, film, and pulp culture.
Public Service Broadcasting is a very exciting band hailing from Great Britain. If you're in the mood for some Burial meets Living Colour meets DJ Shadow meets Doctor Who, then PSB is for you. Their latest album, Inform, Educate, Entertain, is highly regarded and one of our new favorites.
Today we are joined by frontman J. Willgoose Esq. He plays the banjo, which is a pretty epic thing because you can go all out with a banjo. You can go all over the place. It's twangy. It's just fantastic. But apart from that, how's life, man?
Yeah, good, thanks. Currently being battered by yet another storm over here. Sorry, it's very like an Englishman to talk about the weather, but this sounds like the windows are going to cave in at any minute. So if the line drops, then that's probably why.
No, that's cool. Our weather is not too great here in Toronto, Canada as well, so nothing to complain about. So I mentioned Doctor Who briefly in your introduction because while researching you, I saw some clips from Time Out London, and did you ever get a chance to follow up with Matt Smith about him copying your wardrobe? I really want to know that. I'm a Whovian, are you? No. It's very much a tongue-in-cheek comment. That the thing I kind of had an issue with was people saying, "Oh, you've nicked his look," I suppose. Time-wise, I can prove that I've been wearing a bow tie and looking rather nerdy since a long time. But from 2009 as Public Service Broadcasting at the very latest. So I'm sure if I ever actually met the chap himself, I'm sure he'd be a very nice and friendly guy. I don't have any particular beef with him. It's more people who just assume that that's where the look came from. It came from kind of early 70s-ish sort of BBC types and sort of Open University type stuff over here. That's kind of where it was inspired by, not necessarily by Doctor Who.
Speaking of BBC and I guess news, what the major thing with your project is that you take a lot of sampling from actual public service announcements. Now, where did that kind of inspiration come from? Like, what made you want to actually use those kinds of samples within the music itself?
Well, in terms of actually sort of why I wanted to use those samples, I mean, it was pure and simple, really, because of the sound of them. It was the kind of character, and I guess it's from listening to a lot of stuff like DJ Shadow and kind of the first Uncle album. You got those little. The first Uncle album, it has that little sort of vignette halfway through about the board game called Ball Buster or something, and it's just kind of like slightly earnest, but at the same time quite sort of amusing. And there's this kind of a character in those voices that you can't really fake. So you've got to go looking for the originals if you want it to sound, sound authentic, I suppose. So yeah, it was kind of from that kind of perspective, really. And I've been doing this a while now, and as it's kind of gone on and grown, it's broadened out a little bit from originally being slightly sort of novelty and just using it for the sake of using it, and now it's become much more kind of central part
of the songwriting process itself, and also of just kind of why we do what we do, if you like.
For sure. You bring up DJ Shadow now. DJ Shadow's first album, obviously Introducing, was comprised of pretty much only samples. Do you want to kind of achieve that kind of an album at some point where you just have mostly or only samples and that are pieced together in such a way that they're almost completely unrecognizable? Or do you want to keep to this tradition where, as you were saying, you like the kind of tone that comes from these announcements that creates something more than the actual words that are just being said?
I think I don't think there's any point in trying to emulate or repeat what he did with that album, because I think I don't think anybody would ever get close to it. It was quite clearly a lifetime's worth of listening to music and loving music of from all different kinds of influences, I suppose, and having the skill and the ability and the ear to put it all together into something new. I mean, it's just an absolutely incredible album. There aren't really words enough to describe how amazing it is. So yeah, in terms of wanting to do something like that, I think it's pointless. It's been done to. As well as anybody's ever going to do it, it's already been done. We're much more kind of, I suppose, if we're putting our own sort of spin on it, it's much more about combining samples, a fair amount of electronic music, kind of electronic instruments, and also, there's a lot of kind of acoustic. You've already mentioned the banjo, but there's a lot of guitar playing on there. Obviously, live drums are on there, which, especially when we play live, is great to watch. So I think that's kind of where we're going, rather than purely trying to go down a 100% sample route.
After going through all of these historical quotes for the last few years, have you found one that really speaks out, or your favorite one out of all of these?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a couple. People kind of keep asking. Around the time the album came out over here, we were getting interviewed quite a lot. We were on tour quite a lot, so we were sort of doing 2 or 3 interviews a day, and people kept saying, what's the message that you're trying to send? And I hadn't necessarily even thought much about what the message was that we were trying to send, but I think overall, what kind of comes through the quotes that we've chosen and the music that we've chosen to make around it is hopefully a spirit of kind of positivity. And there's a quote from the song, I call it Roygbiv, but I don't know how you pronounce it, Roygbiv, GBIV anyway. A song about the invention of colour television, and I just found a line in that song that's it goes, I believe in this world to come, I think it's going to be a pretty good world. And as kind of band mantras go, that I suppose is about as close as we've come to putting it into a song. But I mean, there's other ones as well. I find the whole sort of Everest song and video that we've done, I find it probably the most moving of the ones we've done. And there's one fantastic line in that of 2 very small men cutting steps in the roof of the world, which that I think that's probably up there as well. So yeah, probably those 2. But there's several others that just make me laugh every time I hear them. They're still just too funny for words, really.
I pronounce it Roygbiv, but that's actually my favorite track.
Yeah, I think everybody. Yeah, I think pretty much everybody apart from me and my other half do.
And I guess myself. I'm Roygbiv man myself.
Oh yeah. Oh, good work. Well done.
Yeah, there we go.
You're on the list.
There we go. We're the minority.
People here in North America and Canada specifically may not know you that well yet. Where did this path to music begin for you and Wigglesworth, your partner?
I like the word "yet" in there, as if at some point they will know us that well. I guess it sort of started about age 14 for me, and if there was one band that kind of really kicked everything off, much as they kind of very swiftly went downhill, and were not really worth writing home about. But the first Oasis album really was a bit of a
right
shell over here, and it kind of lit the touch paper in a way, and that's the reason I started playing the guitar, and from there really I just kind of knocked around in a few bands. I was in bands with school friends and with my brother, and then played in several bands when I was at university, and it was all kind of mostly for fun. I don't think we ever really were in danger of getting anywhere or certainly achieving any kind of exposure or anything. But I was always harbouring a hope that something like this would happen, but it was only really when I kind of just gave up entirely and started doing something entirely for my own amusement, which is this, that things ironically started happening.
For sure. Now, you talk about your old influences, like you've mentioned DJ Shadow and early Oasis, of course, which is when they were at their prime. Do you have any current influences that you have at the moment, particularly like maybe electronic musicians or even live performing musicians? And like, what kind of musicians that are around now would you want to collaborate with? Like Burial and Fortet and Tom York, for instance, have released stuff, and this kind of stuff that that other musicians collaborate on. Of the like, do you have any musicians now that you would perhaps want to collaborate with electronically or live?
We definitely get a big kick out of playing with other people, and the prospect of collaborating with people is an exciting one. I mean, I think what Beryl, Fortet, and Tom York have done is pretty special. I'm probably more of a fan of Beryl's stuff when he's on his own. I think it's kind of got more of his own sort of sonic footprint on it. Really, he's definitely one of the few people around now who's kind of really carved out his own sound. And you know, when you hear something by him, you know it's by him. And he's got kind of an integrity and. He's a very admirable artist anyway, definitely. But I don't think necessarily we'd be ones that he would want to collaborate with. I think, you know, I could kind of reel off a wish list of people I'd want to collaborate with, but I think if you were to ask them if they'd go with us, I think the list would very swiftly dwindle.
You never know.
Well, you never know. You can only ask, but
exactly.
I don't really want to. You don't really want to ask because you'll probably get knocked back, and nobody likes that.
Well, no, you've got to have more faith than that.
All right, I'll ask him tomorrow. I'll get on the phone to old Burial.
There you go.
He's only from down the road. I think he grew up in Putney and I grew up in Tooting.
Exactly.
So give him a call.
Exactly. He's had like a public revelation of himself. He's released a new picture, and now is the perfect time. You have to.
Yeah. He's obviously branching out. He's commercializing a bit. You know.
Exactly.
Yeah, and let us know what he says.
Yeah, I think we can all guess. But
So, on a more philosophical level, kind of, what are your thoughts on the music industry in general right now? Are we all in a good place?
I can only really speak as somebody making music and you know, selling music, I suppose, and also at the same time being somebody who still buys a lot of music and listens to a lot of music and goes to shows when we're not playing one ourselves. We played over 150 last year, which kind of narrows the opportunity for going to anyone else's. But I think where we are at the moment, personally speaking, it is fantastic. I don't think we could have done what we're doing without the internet behind us, without kind of the word of mouth that it's enabled us to sort of get the kind of the close contact that we have with fans through it. And we seem to have a very sort of enthusiastic and dedicated following, which I think is something that partly comes about because of the nature of the music that we make and the subjects that we write about, but I think is also partly because of just how sort of active and hopefully sort of considerate and friendly as we are, on the internet and in social media and stuff. So from that point of view, I think I think it's better than it ever has been. I mean, we're on our own record label. It's just us on it. It's kind of run by me and our two managers. So it's very much kind of cottage industry. And we've had support from sort of distributors and hopefully just about to do a publishing deal. But we've kind of very much done it from the outside, if you will. And I just genuinely don't think anybody could have done it the way that we've done it now. Like even 10 years ago, I don't think there were many people doing this. I think they're much more likely to follow the sort of the traditional model of, you kind of get a manager, get signed, and then that's the route you go down. Whereas we've kind of gone a slightly more modern one, and for my money, a bit more interesting one. Really, we've got kind of full control over what we do and when we do it and how we do it, which for a self-confessed control freak like me is fantastic.
Now you're talking about the shaping of your music and the current times as of now. You mentioned that an influence was 70s BBC and earlier eras. and of course, because you're taking clips from like announcements or the news, what do you think of the news now, especially with a lot of the public fighting against the biases of specific stations like Fox in America, for instance? Do you think that news is in kind of a stuck place, especially because of all of these attacks on the political stances a lot of stations will have? Or do you think that a lot of this outcrying, especially through social media, that we are learning to find our own news sources, and that is actually not too bad if we can actually find our news for ourselves?
Yeah, I think it's definitely in an interesting place. I mean, I don't keep personally too up to date with the antics of Fox over here. I try and keep them out of my life as much as possible. Cause
You're better off that way.
Well, at least a much more happy and sane existence than if you actually start paying attention to these lunatics. But yeah, we've kind of got our own versions of them over here. They're not quite as rabid and frothing at the mouth, but they're still as unpleasant. It's difficult really because it's I don't know. I mean, I come from a country where the BBC is publicly funded and has been a sort of trusted source of news. And it's sort of continually under attack these days from right-wing forces and from sort of privately owned media enterprises where you have fantastically powerful, media moguls, I suppose, like a certain Australian Mr. Murdoch and people of his ilk. And I just genuinely don't think it's healthy for one person or one group of people to have that much power. So I'm very much sort of siding with the sort of publicly funded model, really. I think the BBC has been a fantastic thing for this country. It's slightly depressing, really, because I think they're probably the forces of conservatism are probably winning the battle over here. It looks like they're kind of at least making a heavy impact over there as well, and it's mildly depressing, really. I try not to watch a lot of. Certainly try not to watch a lot of rolling news because there's very little substance there. But it's in an interesting place at the moment.
So let's talk more about you again. So your music video for the single Everest was just released a few days ago, and I noticed that. So along with your music videos and your on-stage performances, you stitched together the audio, which we talked about, but also historical archival footage and like propaganda type of material. What is the process like when you come to making songs which include all the visuals as well? Do you begin with an idea of what you want to show off to the world, or do you have clips that you have first and then you try build a message from there?
It nearly always comes from a musical idea, I suppose. There's normally a very small musical idea, and I don't really know where that comes from originally, but maybe I've heard something, or maybe just mucking around on the guitar in a sound check somewhere, or just sitting around at home fiddling away. So there'll be some kind of like small idea of, very small idea for a song, and then kind of it sort of sits there and develops in my head for a while, and then for example, with the new kind of EP or mini album that we're working on of 8 tracks, it's very much focused around one kind of historical event, or one series of historical events. So all these kind of musical ideas that have been sort of floating around for the last year or 2 years or so, you start kind of in your head matching them up with the topics that you'd like to write about, and then I kind of go off and search for the stuff that I think is going to match it, and sometimes you find stuff that matches it perfectly in the way that you thought it would, and other times you find that the stuff that you hoped existed doesn't quite exist, so you end up kind of slightly adapting it and slightly changing it. And then there are even other times where you just find something totally unexpected, and it changes the direction of the song entirely. But it normally starts from a kind of a musical footing. It very rarely starts from finding something, video-wise, and developing it from there. With the exception of a few, actually. We got approached by 2 Dutch guys earlier last year who wanted us to write 2 tracks about the world's sort of biggest marathon ice skating race, which is called the Elfstedentocht and happens in the north of the Netherlands.
So they actually had the rights to some footage, and they just gave us the footage and said, write something to this, please. So we did, which was, it's interesting doing it that way around, but it's kind of the exception rather than the norm to do it that way.
Now, you mentioned that you had a central theme or a message with this new upcoming release of eight tracks. If you were to come up with something that you really enjoyed, but it didn't really fit within the confines of this message you're trying to get out or convey, how would you go about that? Would you try and readjust the song so that it would work, or these ideas, or would you scrap it and have it saved for another rainy day? How would you go about that?
I think as I'm working on something, I quite swiftly get an idea of whether or not it's kind of coming together the way I hoped. There's been a few things that haven't really worked properly, and I've just had to shelve and just as you say, save them for a rainy day. But with specifically with the new thing that we're working on, because it's been kind of percolating for quite a while already. It's kind of been going around for a year or so. You've kind of done a lot of the sort of pre-screening yourself already. And you're reasonably confident about what's going to work and what's not going to work. I think a lot of people see the way that we write music and the way that we kind of, find subjects that we're interested in and take samples. A lot of people seem to see that as a kind of limitation that we've placed on ourselves. But actually, I've found that it's a really good kind of songwriting tool, because you're tackling all kinds of different subjects, and they're kind of provoking you in all kinds of different ways, and it sends you in different musical directions that if you were just writing a kind of bulk standard 10-song album, you might not kind of have the license to veer off in the directions that we have done.
For sure. And as you were saying, these kinds of they're not really confinements. In fact, they're more enhancements, because what I find with a lot of sampling, even with your music, when you use actual footage, is that you can use samples and perhaps twist what they're saying, not even audibly, but through contrast and through almost sarcasm, that songs can now be ambiguous because the samples no longer take just one singular meaning, that they can have a whole plethora of meanings and purposes. Now, do you think that when it comes to sampling, that maybe later on as your music progresses, that you might want to try different means of sampling? Or do you think that what you have right now, as you were saying, it won't be limited, and that you could have many more ways of digging up new uses for the way that you're approaching music?
Yes, it's an interesting one. I think we've got to find different and new ways of using the material that we find. I don't think you can kind of just keep working to a formula in a way, find something that you like and, follow the same sort of structure. I think you've got to mix things up and keep it reasonably fresh. Otherwise, people, ourselves first and foremost, are going to get bored. And this is from the start. This is about kind of doing something that entertained us. So if we get bored, then for certain everybody else is going to get bored. Right. So we've got to try and find sort of different ways of using it, I suppose. But I really think it's quite a kind of a broad future ahead of us, really. We could kind of take it anywhere. I see sort of, with a name like public service broadcasting, I see that as, you could really argue that anything could be public service broadcasting in a certain light. So it's really, sure. It's quite liberating, as I said, rather than kind of restrictive. I guess we'll find out as we kind of progress.
Exactly. You're not hitting any walls anytime soon. I can guarantee that.
Well, I hope not. If you hear the second album and you think it's terrible, then we'll see what you think then. But
all right.
So actually, our senior writer and concert photographer, Sarah, introduced me to your music in the last month or so, and I was really impressed with it. You go by the name, we mentioned it before, J. Willgoose Esq. Do you think that the sense of mystery is important for an artist? And do you think it's harder to maintain this with today's society?
I don't know about. I can't really speak to anybody else, but I certainly like a little bit of kind of enigma, I suppose, surrounding us. I think we're a slightly unusual outfit, and I think it'd be a bit of a shame, really, if we were sort of, if we were if our life stories were out there for everybody to read. For example, if you're sad enough, you can kind of go online and hopefully try and find different versions of how we met. And I don't think you'll ever find the same version of how we met, because there's a small risk that the story changes every single time, and probably will forevermore. Which in a way is kind of something that we do to keep ourselves amused, but is also, it's just nice to sort of keep things mildly interesting and have people be able to guess. It's so easy to find out so much about all kinds of different aspects of music these days. It's nice to be able to just kind of withhold a few answers and just give a sort of knowing nod and a wink occasionally, and let people kind of come up with their own ideas, I suppose. Let people come to you as much as you're kind of trying to sell yourself to them, I suppose.
And I did try to research you, and it was kind of tricky.
Yeah.
But you probably liked it.
If you really wanted to, I think you could find out some. You could find it all out, but I think you'd have to kind of dig a little bit deeper, I suppose.
That's why we have this interview.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully you didn't give us too many twists here.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, speaking of mystery and the like, a lot of this of what you were talking about remind me a bit of Daft Punk, of course, who won the Grammy for Best Album of the Year and whatnot. They've been wearing helmets for the longest time, even though, as you said, if people really wanted to know, they could dig a little bit deeper. Their actual faces have been revealed and their identities have been revealed a really long time ago, but nonetheless, they still have this sense of mystery. Now, I find with that kind of approach that the music will tend to speak louder than what people are trying to say about the musicians themselves. Now, with their last album, what they tried to do was they tried to take sampling music and make it more organic and humane, which was a return to kind of the older eras, kind of like what you're doing when you're trying to revisit the 70s and what the 70s represented. Now, with modern electronic music, do you find that perhaps a lot of it is machine-like, and whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing, or do you think that because we have different people behind the computers that they're adding their own kind of timbres and their own kind of signature sounds, like you were saying with Burial? Perhaps not every electronic musician now has this kind of a token sound that you guys are trying to achieve, of course, right? Do you think that a lot of it does sound too manufactured despite their best efforts because it's from behind a computer? Or do you think that the way that you can approach the songwriting process, that you can still add a lot of human qualities to it?
I think the best people in any field are always going to find a way of kind of stamping their own mark on it. And just a few of the people you've mentioned already, Burial, Fortet, even sort of Caribou. There's loads of people over here. There's a not particularly well-known guy called Dataset over here who's absolutely incredible producer, I think, and he's definitely got his own sound. I think it's always about learning how to use the tools that you've got, really, how best to kind of make them work for you. You've got to try and put a bit of personality into it, which can be hard when it's if everybody's using the same kind of tools in the same way, then it's obviously going to be a bit difficult. But
yeah,
I think we've definitely reached a level where, electronically, I think there's enough kind of versatility and enough room, even for sort of an almost virtuoso level, to sort of be emerging in it, definitely, and for personality to come through, even in sort of largely instrumental electronic music. I think there's still plenty of room for that to come through.
Now, you said that we've reached that level. Where do you think within the length of time that we've had electronic music, starting from the 70s with perhaps like Kraftwerk and the like, where do you think with electronic music that we've reached that level, or even like started to progress to that level where we could have separate sounds as opposed to this sound that people tried to match? Like when Low came out, David Bowie's Low, there was that drum sound that everybody tried to achieve. Now, with everybody having access to programs, like I used to have a lot of programs. Like I had Cubase and I had Audacity and all these programs. with all this access, everybody can kind of replicate these sounds because on YouTube they'll have how to make Katy Perry songs and beats within like 2 minutes, right? So, where do you think this kind of evolution began, where electronic music began to branch off into its own different genres as opposed to trying to replicate the sounds that others pioneered?
It's probably been going since it started, really. I mean, you mentioned Kraftwerk there. I don't think they were trying to do anything that anybody had done before, particularly. They definitely kind of forged their own path, and there's been people all along the way who've been doing that kind of thing. Bowie kind of took a lot of the sort of the krautrock and the German sound and brought it to a wider market, I suppose, with albums like Low. And there's been several sort of landmark albums on the way, but I suppose it's more today the kind of the ubiquitousness of the technology and how it's so cheap now relative to what it was for anybody to kind of be making music on their own at home. So the risk is that you kind of everybody's using the same tools to make the same kind of sounding music, the same kind of building blocks. The risk is that it all ends up sounding quite samey, and it's just about trying to find enough kind of personality that you can bring through in that music. And I think that's one of the reasons why we kind of still use live instruments a lot is that it brings out imperfections in playing and kind of timing that you can quite easily get rid of entirely from electronic music, and they rob it of any kind of human feel. And certainly I know that with my banjo playing, with my guitar playing, it's always going to sound human, because there's always going to be lots of little errors in it, which can work to our advantage. But it's definitely something that we're aware of when we're trying to make music, in not kind of making it too rigid and too predictable, I suppose.
So that's a good answer. Yeah, we really like that. We really appreciate you trying to do something more organic / electronic. That's pretty unique versus than all just computerized stuff. But so I know you want to keep your mystery, but what are some of your hobbies? Like, do you like reading? Do you like watching TV? Do you like films?
He likes BBC. He told us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else do you do?
I like all of those things. Yeah. I listen to music first and foremost, I suppose. Music
other than the music, what would someone find you when you're bored at home doing other than music?
Reading possibly. Sort of all sorts of stuff, mostly fiction, I suppose, but a fair amount of non-fiction as well.
Oh, yeah. What are you currently reading?
I was I've just started Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel, which I've been strongly urged to read by my other half. She's been on at me for ages to read it. So yeah, it's got off to a good start. I need a good long book for the flight. So looking forward to get stuck into that. But I kind of I read all sorts. I don't tend to read a great deal of modern stuff, which you possibly might expect, given nature and music as well. But I've been reading a lot of Dickens over the last few years, and just kind of catching up with the sort of the greats, I suppose.
Do you ever feel like it influences your music process, or do you try to keep them separately?
Well, the funny thing about creating anything, I suppose, is that you can never really say, unless you're just pure and simple stealing it, you can never really say where it comes from. Sometimes something will just come out and you can't really put a finger on it. And obviously it's come from some kind of influence, because there's very few people who have a genuinely original kind of spark within them. I think for most people it's just about kind of assimilating the influences that you're taking in daily life, and something new but made up of older things comes out the other end. It's quite difficult to say, really. I do think it'd be quite fun to try and sort of use what we do and combine it with something like that at some point in the future. But it's still kind of trying to work out how to do that, maybe.
Now, you seem like a really well-informed person with a lot of different tastes in a variety of things, and because you've dived into a little bit of politics and kind of the current state of the world, and you've discussed things which you consider landmarks on any body of work, music or novels or films, what would you consider some really important pieces when it comes to describing the modern day and age, whether it be for that era or for now? Like, do you have any that stuck out for you particularly?
Well, I mean, that's a big question.
It's a way to end off the interview.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
You got him.
Yeah. I can only really go back to the first thing I remember as really having a big effect on me in terms of sort of literature, I suppose, which was extremely well known. So it's not like I'm kind of thinking outside the box here. But I read 1984 when I was about 14, I think, and I doubt sadly that there's any kind of civilization, modern civilization, that doesn't ring true in certain elements.
Sadly.
Yeah. So that probably more than anything else, that kind of opened the door. Before that, I was probably just reading and just reading stuff and not really realizing that books could contain ideas as big as those that are contained within that, and from that kind of that music could contain ideas as big as that, and that films could contain ideas as big as that. So more than anything else, that book kind of open those doors. But whether or not it was that book or whether it was just because I was kind of at the right age when I read it and it was the first sort of ideas driven book that I read, it's hard to say. But there are a lot of extremely good ideas in it though.
For sure. I mean, when I wasn't into reading back in high school, sadly I somehow graduated. 1984.
Good job.
1984 was one of the novels that they got us to read, and it was the only one in all of high school that got me into reading and actually got me back into reading. Now, it struck a lot of chords with me that it did with you, where a lot of things will ring true now. And there's a common saying, I don't remember who the originator of it was, that 1984 should have been used as a warning and not as a guidebook. And sadly, especially with the NSA, and even renaming a continent to Oceania, which came from 1984, we have a lot of hints that perhaps, Orwell got it too right. So
it's far worse than Orwell predicted.
Sadly, and there's still a lot left that he predicted that we're heading towards that direction. Do you think perhaps we could have any current detectors of where our political fate may stand within the near future, or do you think social media has pretty much got that stuck with the different rebellions and the different uprisings, like the 99% movement? Do you think that we're pretty much in a state where we can inform ourselves, or do we still have a little bit of space for a medium to predict what may happen to us in the future?
Yeah, that one definitely has got me. Yeah, sorry, not sure on that one.
I apologize.
That's too difficult.
My brain has been slightly frazzled.
This will be.
It's good, but it's just slightly more involved than the usual interviews you get. We normally get like, oh, where'd you get the footage from, and what comes first, the music or the video, rather than what pointers are there for where society is going in today's world.
This is a little higher than that, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. This is as high as it's been since the interviews you did in France, and they're deep thinkers over there as well. Those are tough interviews.
As Canadians, we have a little bit of French put into our systems with the fact that we have to read things in 2 languages on all of our labels. So perhaps that's where that came from.
Yeah, it's coming through.
A little bit of Francois coming out. Well, that's just an answer you can have for next time in our next interview, whenever that may be.
Yeah, I'll have an answer for you by then, hopefully, yeah.
Perfect. All right. So thanks, man, for chatting with us today. Let's wrap things up. You have an upcoming North American and European tour. You'll make stops at South by Southwest and, of course, here in Toronto at the Drake Hotel on February 26, 2014. Will that be your first show in Toronto?
Yeah, first show in Canada. So
your debut.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
We will be there. Actually, Sarah, who recommended you to us, will be there covering the event, so maybe she'll say hi.
Come and say hello, yeah.
Yeah. Where can all of our listeners find you on the interwebs?
It would just be publicservicebroadcasting.net. That would be the one.
Yeah, and you have a Facebook, and you have
Twitter.
Yeah,
Public Service Broadcasting, and Twitter's a bit harder. It's just PSB_HQ, but we're out there on all of them.
And you also have at @Willgoose_Esq as well, if people really, really want to stalk you.
Yeah, if people absolutely need to know what's going on in my life, yep.
It's Big Brother coming through. This is 1984 all over again.
Well, it's self-invited though, isn't it? You know, I'm kind of asking for it.
Yeah, a little bit.
All right, thank you, Mr.
Cheers.
Esquire, for hanging out with us today.
Thank you. No, it was a pleasure.
Thanks, J. Willgoose Esquire, for hanging out with us today. You can follow myself on Twitter at Sean Chin.
And you can find myself, Andreas, at Andreas Babs. And if you have an answer for my final question, please hit me up. I'd like to know what you think.
Yes, do that. And you can do that by following the show on Twitter at Live in Limbo. You can use the hashtag Capsule Podcast to join in on the conversation. And of course, you can find the show notes at liveinlimbo.com/capsule. See you next time.